Live training. We're going to all talk about the $1,000,000 mistake that women leaders are making. So welcome. Feel free to drop your questions, your comments, or even where you're watching from in the comments, because I'd love to hear where you're watching from. And we're going to talk all about today about that $1,000,000 mistake that you might be making. So have you ever found yourself going into that first meeting and going, or even any meeting, but let's start with that first meeting, right? You go into this first meeting and you walk away from this first crucial meeting and you're feeling like, I think I just missed the mark here. Whether it's in a salary negotiation for yourself, maybe it's a negotiation with some suppliers or a new client. It could also be things like investor meeting, etc. But did you know that there's a common mistake that women leaders are making in those first meetings that could cost you millions? So I want you to stay tuned, because I'm going to share this $1,000,000 mistake with you, and I'm going to show you how you can actually avoid it as well. So let's get into it. So this $1,000,000 mistake, well, it can come across as quite simple. There seems to be always a bit of a struggle when it comes to, especially for women, because there's this really tight, fine line that we need to walk as well, where it comes to doing this successfully and implementing it so that you can avoid that mistake and, of course, bring those millions into either your company's or pockets or into your own pockets over the long term. So what is that mistake? That mistake is all about failing to establish a very strong executive or leadership presence. Now, why this is a mistake is when you come in, and this could be in different ways, right? You might just start going like, well, perhaps it's this. And once you start to kind of soften your tone and soften your language, now this doesn't mean I want you to go in there shouting and having yelling match. But when you're softening your language, you're bringing in more of the, I wonder if, has anyone considered this already? You are actually diminishing your stature as well as your authority within that context and within that meeting. And it can also come across as being indecisive. So having a weak leadership presence or executive presence actually undermines your credibility, as well as your ability to influence the outcome or the decisions. And the amount of women that I've spoken to over the last month who have just shared with me, if like, you know what, I didn't get selected for the next role because I was missing executive presence. Now, I will say sometimes it's like you do need to ask deeper as to what does somebody mean when it comes to executive presence? What are they talking about? Now, when it comes to that, into real life, what happens is, like I said, if you don't have that strong executive presence, and as women, we have the additional challenge, right? We don't want to come across as too aggressive, because then you're all of a sudden, bitchy, and that's not where we want to be. And you don't want to come across as too soft, because then you're too nice, which means you're likely not going to be a great leader. And if we want to be more assertive, then we get called out sometimes like, oh my goodness, why are you so aggressive? Right? So as women, we have this very fine line to walk, and there are definitely ways that we can do this very effectively. And I have a whole training on this inside the Leadership Accelerator program. And so when it comes to some things that you can see, it's like maybe you're losing out on deals. Or if you look at how do you negotiate your salary, there's research out there that shows that women can anywhere between $1 million to $1.5 million that they miss in terms of compensation over their career, because they haven't negotiated and haven't stood strong in that negotiation. And again, this is another topic. It happened yesterday. I had my Leadership Accelerator group call with our clients, and that was a really big topic, like around negotiating and how do I ask, and how do I do this in a way that still aligns with me, and do I even deserve to ask for this amount, or should I just ask for less? And you want to think about different scenarios or different situations where that first impression is really crucial. Imagine yourself making a pitch to new investors, right? If you come across a little bit hesitant and a little bit, I'm going to make myself smaller, it makes you smaller for your investors, and they're less likely to be confident in or even willing to invest because you're like, well, I don't know if she's really, she doesn't really know if this is the right thing to do. One of my clients was sharing this week that she presented in front of an entire panel, her vision and her roadmap, and she felt like she wasn't confident enough and that she was getting lots of questions. And part of the feedback was, well, we just wanted to know how confident you are in what you're proposing. So not necessarily in a bad way, but in that instance, because she kind of hesitated, let's put it that way, in that situation, that unsureness and not really knowing if she's got the right answer and a little bit of lack of confidence in that moment really shone through. I don't even know the word, but shone through, whatever. Anyways, came through in that moment. And so when you're not having it for yourself, and a lot of executive presence also really has to do with how do you carry yourself? What is your attitude coming in? Do you feel like, hey, I'm the leader? Or do you hesitate and go like, okay, well, as long as someone's giving me permission, then I can do this. So how do you go into this? Now, I want to share with you just one technique from my boardroom whisper technique, which is inside the Leadership Accelerator. So if your interest is piqued, you're like, oh, I'd like to know more about this Leadership Accelerator, then DM me Accelerator, because we're going to have a conversation around that. And I'd love to talk to you about that. But I'm going to give you just one little tidbit, one of my favorite tidbits that I've seen has made a really big impact for my clients. So you can start off first off with making sure that you're prepared before you go into that first meeting, right? You want to make sure you know the individuals that are there, what are their interests, what is their agenda, what are the things that it's important to them. And you also want to be really clear as to which points or what's your intention and what is the lasting impression on the points that they need to remember at the end of that meeting. Whether that is a decision that needs to be made, whether that is key factors that here's my 3 things, if you're going to salary negotiation, maybe there's 3 key parts that they need to understand: your value, the contribution that you make, as well as, of course, the compensation. But doing that homework can also really help you to understand, hey, can I ask this? Is this going to be a very strong way of framing it, right? One way to, again, in yesterday's group call, we talked about, for example, one of the clients gets to present to her CEO, which is fabulous. And we talked about positioning it rather than as like, hey, I want to pick your brain and I want you to see where you're going, is actually put herself and say, like, here's what my thoughts are. Let's, like, where does it match yours? Or how does this reflect into what your vision is like? Because it comes across much more stronger if you're already bringing in your own ideas rather than waiting for somebody else. Now, when it comes to, like I said, I promise I was going to give you something from my boardroom whisper technique. When it comes to really projecting confidence, there's a couple of different ways, right? One is in how do you show up in terms of your body language. Make sure you've got like a really, you're sitting upright, you've got a strong handshake, you're making eye contact. But here's something that we don't really consider very often is when it comes to your communication in the meetings, and this happens more often than not to women, is how often are you getting interrupted? Because each interruption actually cuts you from, you're like, oh, I was making my point, and it weakens that point, but it also diminishes your own leadership authority. It also diminishes that presence that you have that meeting. Now, do you need to call somebody out and like, hey, stop interrupting me? Of course not. That is where within the boardroom whisper technique, we really talk about, we have multiple ways to do this, but I'm going to give you one today. And one of those ways of just addressing when someone starts to interrupt you is just to say, hey, that sounds like a really great idea. And I look forward to hearing it. Just let me finish I'm going to finish my point first. What it does is a really gentle way and a very kind way of like, okay, hold on. I see that. Just give me a minute. I'm going to finish my point first, and then it's your turn. But it isn't a harsh call out, which does lead to a much more projection of confidence of like knowing like, no, I get to own this space. I get to own this moment in time, and I get to speak. So when you find yourself in those first meetings, ensuring just a few basic things. One is just making sure that you're, in terms of body language, you are projecting confidence. And if you need to, pull on your power suit. I love, for example, red is one of my favorite colors. I love to pull on red, even on the good days, but especially when I need that extra boost of like, hey, I need to feel powerful. I need to feel confident. Then pull on that power suit. Make sure that even the way you dress gives you an impression and that feeling of power. And then it's about also just ensuring you're calling out small things. Like when you're getting interrupted, just give it pushback. Pushback of like, hey, you know what? I'm going to take my space. I'm going to finish my thought first, and then you can bring yours, right? In a sense, it's always training the other person also of like how you should be treated and how you want to be respected. So when you're looking at that $1 million mistake in terms of leadership presence, executive presence, and you're like, I really want to have that ability to influence others, but I really want to have that ability to negotiate for myself, but also for my organization, or get that investment funding coming through, then think about that first impression that you're going to be making. And don't worry, if you've already gotten past the first impression stage, hey, you can start implementing these tips that I gave you today, even now, and you're going to notice a difference. When one of my clients implemented the boardroom whisper technique and a couple of different strategies, what she saw happen is instead of being in this endless round of discussion, within one meeting of implementing this, she was getting decisions through. Her projects were being approved. She was getting the resources and the funding. So the impact of this can be huge. So don't underestimate that, because with that impact, she's able to move forward, but also showcases her own leadership. It showcases what she's capable of. And now she gets that next higher level, high visibility project, and she's creating momentum. And other people are recognizing that as well. So don't underestimate the power of your presence and being that and really embodying that executive presence. And if you're finding yourself like, oh, Kim, but I struggle with this, I'm not sure if I can do this, and how do I do it? Like I said, we've got a whole bit of this, a whole whole training and a whole conversations with that inside the Leadership Accelerator. So if that's something that you're interested in, I want you to DM me Accelerator and let's have a conversation around that. So again, just to recap this for today. So if you're finding yourself walking out of that first crucial meeting going like, oh goodness, I just missed the mark, and you don't want to make that the common mistake that a lot of women leaders make, it means it's costing them millions. I want you to really look towards how are you showing up. So what do? You make sure you're well prepared. Of course, right? Most of us high achievers are really well prepared. We know all the answers, and then we just get tongue-tied when we get into the meeting. Well, don't worry about that. Let's start just making sure that we know who's in the meeting, what's going to happen, etc. You want to start projecting confidence. So that could be with your body language, right? Being upright, shoulders back. Make sure you make eye contact. But also things, if it helps you, put on your power outfit. Find one that you feel absolutely fantastic in. That is your go-to outfit when you need that extra little boost as well. As well as the third point when I shared is, for example, don't allow interruptions, or at least not that many, because it undermines you in terms of your leadership authority and your leadership presence. we all know someone that doesn't ever get interrupted because you just don't do that. And again, rewind back to the where I shared what you can say, because that line, it can be so helpful, or a couple of variations of that. And I've got a lot of variations of that within the Leadership Accelerator program, can just help you make the impact and have the influence that you want and get the outcome that you want. So that in the end, when you're negotiating for your salary or for that new deal or for that investment round, you're being seen as a powerful leader who is there to make decisions, who's there to move things forward, and is going to make this a success. So again, if you're interested in learning more, then DM me Accelerator and we'll have a conversation on that. And I really want to thank you so much for watching this, whether you're watching this live or on the replay. Drop in the comments any questions or DM me any questions. And if you know of someone that needs to see this training today, then please feel free to share it with them. Thank you so much. And I wish you all a very happy Easter.